All right. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 2 of Cannabiz and Company. And today I am joined by founding member Jenny Germano of ICS Consulting. Jenny, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me, Jamie.
It's always great to have you. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about what you do. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that ICS Consulting does.
Yeah, well, I have 11 years here in the cannabis industry. I started in Colorado in 2009, and I basically was a dispensary manager and helped operate dispensaries out here for about 6 years in the medical and in recreational. I helped launch a recreational dispensary in 2014, and so I've just all that experience. I then took it and I started my company, ICS Consulting, in 2015. And basically, I created it because the industry was lacking the compliance support that it needed. So now what I do in my business is I'm a technical writer, so I help with application writing in other states. I come on site and I train employees on compliance. I get people ready. Basically, I call it operational readiness and more like compliance operational readiness. And I get them to where they can get their facilities, they're up to compliance standards or just ready to open, and just making sure that that they're not going to get a violation or anything like that in their facility. And then I get them trained, all the employees trained to help with their SOPs. Basically, from build out to launch is my process to help people with. And as well, I am a ServSafe instructor here in Colorado, and I teach employees health and sanitation practices in the cannabis industry. So I just do a variety of things in this industry, as well as I'm a third-party auditor. I could go on and on, but you can go to my website and see all the amazing stuff I do.
What year was your very first cannabis industry job?
2009.
So it is such an inspiration to hear your journey and how you got to where you are now and teaching these facilities how to implement compliancy. And, and you started as a $12 an hour bud tender. And so,
Well, I started off as a receptionist first, and I actually didn't get paid for my first job because I was working in the restaurant industry. So I was working at a hotel in downtown Denver, and then I was working for a catering company, and then I was a receptionist at a dispensary for 20 hours a week where I worked for free because I was just trying to get my foot in the door. Eventually I got paid, but I mean, for about 3 to 4 months, I didn't even get paid.
wow. Oh my gosh. Goodness gracious. Well, so what's the biggest issue that you see cannabis companies struggle with when it comes to compliancy? Like what are the most common mistakes that you see made?
First, I think it just depends if somebody already had more black market experience, and then so they already come in knowing enough. But then I meet people that have no experience, and I think for those people, it can be overwhelming because it's kind of like, where do I start? That's usually the number one issue, is like, where do I start, or how do I get this all into smaller pieces so I can understand it, or how do I apply all these regulations into my facility, and how do I turn them into standards so I can understand it and I can implement, or I can have my employees implement it. So I would just say the first part is like, where do we start, and then how do I implement all this content that I have that I'm supposed to be adhering to, and then how do I break it up and distribute it appropriately to each license to follow it.
Right. Okay. So what does the compliance role look like in a cultivation facility or a processing center or a provisioning center? How does that role differ between the three different types of licenses?
Yeah, so I would think for the most part, the compliance role, meaning I could be a compliance officer for all three of those facilities. You don't need to have a compliance person for each facility. So if I'm your compliance officer, I can come in and do compliance for all three of those facilities. But what differentiates them would be that obviously in the cultivation side, I have regulations I have to learn that are just specific to cultivation, or I have regulations I have to learn that are just specific to a provisioning center, meaning like how much can I serve a patient? You wouldn't need to know how much you can serve a patient on the cultivation side, but let's just say the compliance around security might be the same in the cultivation or manufacturing and dispensary, meaning the amount of cameras, having a DVR, or like the compliance around retention on that DVR. That could be all the same across the board, but each facility is going to have their own specific type of licenses. Regulations that you have to learn for that license. And so that's kind of pretty much how it breaks down.
Okay. And now how does it differ between a startup, a company that's starting up in this industry compared to one that is operational, maybe, 3 to 5 years down the road?
Oh, there's a lot of difference. So it just depends. Like, so a startup, there's so many things that can happen. So we have startups who come in with a bare minimum of money to invest, maybe more mom and pop, maybe you and your friends or you, and you had to bootstrap this whole thing. And so typically those companies don't have a lot of money to spend right out of the gate, and they're doing everything themselves. But I would say for the startups, they 100%, no matter if they have money, a lot of money or not, they always want to be 100% in compliance. And that's something they want to adhere to because they're trying to get licensed, approved. In Michigan, it's they get pre-qualified, and then they have to have their inspection, and then they still have to get the license. So it just depends on what state that you're in. But what I see with people who have been operating 5 or 6 years, what happens is complacency begins to form, and because I think they've been operating for so long, I don't need anyone to tell me what I'm doing wrong. I've been doing this 5 or 6 years. I know what I'm doing, and I get that a lot, especially in like my own state in Colorado. We've had medical since 2000, and we had rec was legalized in 2012. So a lot of facilities are like, I've been doing this 10 years. I don't really need compliance help, but yet I'll go into their facilities, and within 10 minutes, I can see that they have some compliance issues. They might have outdated signs. They might not have cameras in the right position. So it just really depends. It depends on how often does your state come in and inspect your facility. That fear alone drives people to be more compliant. So if you haven't seen an investigator in your facility in 3 years, how do you think you're going to be? You're going to be really relaxed. You're not really going to be thinking they're coming in. So some things might start to fall through the crack. And it just, like I said, it just depends on what state that you're in. But, I also see facilities who've been doing this 5 or 6 years, and their facilities are unbelievable. They're so clean. They're so well run. So at the end of the day, it just really depends on the processes, and if you were able to implement them properly, and that you're maintaining and you're adhering to everything. There's always a caveat. Like you could have all the SOPs that you want and all the compliance binders you want and all the compliance audits in the world coming out of your ears. At the end of the day, you don't implement anything and maintain it, then it's all for nothing.
Right. Last question.
Sure.
Is it safe to say that compliancy should be your number one priority?
Oh, absolutely. It should be at the top of the list. A lot of times I find it at the bottom of the list, but I think compliance should be at the top of the list. A lot of times people put marketing and branding at the top of the list, and they're like, we have $100,000 to marketing and branding. And I'm like, well, where's the money to invest in compliance? And so a lot of times people don't want to spend. They don't want to spend the money to get compliant. They don't want to hire someone like me to come in because they don't want to spend the money. They think that they've got it. And then I go to these facilities, and I was in a cultivation facility not that long ago, and I was only in it 10 minutes, and I saw about 10 different things wrong within 10 minutes. And that was without even doing an audit or diving in deep and auditing their processes and SOPs. And so at the end of the day, you have to spend money to make money. It's the cost of doing business. Being in compliance we're in the business of compliance. We're not in the business of manufacturing and producing cannabis. We're in the business of compliance first, and then all those things come after the compliance piece.
Right, because you have a lot to lose
A
if
lot to
you're not
lose.
compliant, and so I agree. I definitely think it needs to be, a number one priority in these businesses.
Yeah, you have a lot to lose because you just spent $500,000 or whatever, $300,000 investing in this company. Even if you bootstrap and do it yourself, you're spending your savings and all this money. I never understand why people spend $500,000 to $1 million, build a facility, and then they don't implement compliance, or they pretend to implement compliance to get through their inspections and pass, and then it just drops off a cliff. So to me, you have to protect your investment at all times, nonstop, 24/7. That's like when people cut corners with security, which we see they don't use security guards, and then their employees feel unsafe, and then they're a target for armed robbery. So there's I see cutting corners in a lot of places in this industry, and I think if people didn't cut corners, some of these issues wouldn't be coming up.
Right. Well, Jenny, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today and telling us a little bit about ICS consulting and how important it is to be compliant. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank
Well,
you, Jamie.
thank you. And thank you all for joining us for Cannabiz and Company. And we'll be seeing you around soon. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. We're